guys, as always, I'm Scarlett,
And I'm Echo
and welcome back to Strange, Weird.
and Unforgettable.
Okay, so before we start today, I think there's some stuff we're going to go over, then we'll get into the episode, which I'm thinking is going to be a long one, but almost every time I've said that, it hasn't been as long as I've thought, so I guess we'll see. But first, we wanted to let you guys know that we are socially distancing. And that might be some of the reason for like the weird breakups in the audio, because this entire time that we've been recording this podcast from the very first episode to now, we've been doing it over
hmm
Zoom.
Yeah. My Wi-Fi connection isn't great.
It's gotten a little bit better because we've actually went and hooked my computer up straight into the Ethernet. Hopefully it works better. But yeah, so that's one of the things we wanted to let you guys know. We both work jobs where we're out and around a lot of people. So
hmm
we just decided for now it'd be better if we do the podcast through the internet because it's a tool at our disposal.
Yep.
So, and that's also why sometimes you might get us talking over each other because it's a little bit harder to separate that. But we're getting better at it.
We're trying.
Also, another thing we wanted to add before we get too into this, if you are anything like Echo and I, you listen to a ton of podcasts.
A whole ton.
And at this rate, with everything going on and everything being closed down, you're probably running out of episodes, or at least caught up to the ones you listen to.
I know I am.
So if you're caught up, if you're looking for something new, and if you like true crime, I think we're going to let the hosts tell you about their podcast real quick.
Hey, you. Yes, you. I'm talking to you listening to this podcast right now. You have something in common with us.
I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Taylor, and we are the hosts of Morning Mugshot Podcast, a true crime podcast where every Friday we're bringing you a new episode of missing persons, murder, and just all things true crime. At the end of every episode, we give our thoughts, feelings, and opinions on the case, and we can't wait for you to join us so we can hear your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on every case we do. Come join us and be our brand new bestie. You can find us anywhere you listen to your podcast at Morning Mugshot Podcast.
We hope to see you soon.
Before we get into it, Echo, is there any news or anything you need to tell us about before we start this week?
Just this morning I heard that there's a random stainless steel monolith out in the Ohio desert. Or
Why?
I don't know. It might not be Ohio. I might have screwed that up. And it's been there a long time. Let me make sure.
You better fact check yourself.
Yeah. Ohio doesn't have deserts. What am I talking
No, what
about?
are you? I was gonna say, like, that's the most random place for you to randomly decide to put a desert. You're not trying to play
Utah.
Utah.
It's in Utah. Yeah.
I was trying to make sure you weren't trying to play fact or fiction with me real quick.
No. There is a weird monolith in the Utah desert. It's about 10 to 12 feet tall. It's embedded in the ground in a remote part of Red Rock County. It's probably art, an official says.
I would say so. I don't see why any other reason it would be out of there if it wasn't art.
Yeah.
It's a very random thing to put in a very random place.
Yeah. It very much so is.
So I do have one little thing to tell you guys about. I wasn't going to have this to tell you about at all until today because it happened literally earlier this morning. I was driving to Thanksgiving as one does, and I look to my right. There seems to be something out in the field. Do you want to guess what I saw?
Was it a sandhill crane?
It was a crap ton of them. They were everywhere.
Oh, yeah. They're stopping by again on their way south.
Oh, I got a good little giggle because there was like a group of them. Like, it was like 3 or 4 of them. And they were like doing this weird half hop, half fly thing. And it just looked ridiculous. And then I was just trying to picture how the hell somebody thought that could possibly be an explanation for the Mothman. They're seriously not that big.
There's no way that could mistake them. They're big adjacent, but they're definitely not
Big adjacent. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're an elephant.
No,
you know,
I'm just like, oh my gosh. Okay,
it's not like their wingspan is 12 feet long, 10 to 12 feet long.
That's nowhere near, like, I wouldn't walk out and, like, play with one, but it
Yeah.
definitely isn't that big.
I don't even think they're as big as flamingos.
They're not?
I don't think so.
No, I can tell you they're not, because from my car, judging the size of what it would have been when I walked up on it, it wasn't that big. And I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't like I just saw one little one. I saw tons.
Like a flock.
Exactly. So its average size is not that tall. So this is the first time we're going to put like a discretion in the beginning of one of our podcasts, because we are going to kind of talk about something a little bit yucky and
Yeah.
a lot of bit morbid. So if you get triggered easily, if you have a weaker stomach, if you're younger, we're going to advise you to go back and listen to a past episode, or just turn this one off for now. The first part's not as bad as the last part, but it does get pretty gruesome. So it is part of history. So that's why we felt the need to put a big old disclaimer. Disclaimer, listen to at your own, judgment for this episode.
Yes, because this episode will contain instances of cannibalism.
Exactly. There's a couple things about this episode that we're going to be doing a little bit differently than we normally do. Hopefully you guys don't mind this setup for this episode, but there was so much information that was important to the episode that we are kind of going to do a timeline first through events, and that will have some information in it. Then we're going to go back and talk about just some facts that happened in between all this that didn't have a necessary timeline, and you'll find out why later. Some of it has to do with the snow. Some of it has to do with different groups, because this whole group ended up splitting up into like 3 different groups along the way, like towards the end is what I mean. And then after that, because this was a true event, Echo and I have decided that we kind of want to honor the people that had lost their lives.
Yes.
I think there's 38, and I'm going to let Echo read off those names in the way she chooses to.
Probably just give you the name and their age.
It's important to remember those, because we're actually going to talk about the Donner Party. And for anybody who knows even just a little bit about this, it is a group of pioneers who ended up stuck in the Sahara Nevada mountains, right? Yes. I'm not looking that far down in my notes, and I was like, it was those mountains, right? Because of snowfall, and the group does resort to some very terrible things to survive.
I don't know that we can judge them too harshly for their decisions in a survival situation.
That was something I was going to start with. Keep in mind, okay, for one, they've been traveling miles and for months.
In the 1800s.
They had wagons, and they had to keep up with them, and animals, and a lot of stuff went wrong along the way. So actually, Echo, do you have a piece of paper? Because there's a couple things I wanted you to do this episode. I forgot to warn you that you would need paper and a pen.
I got paper.
That works. Because what I want you to do is I want you to keep track of every time that you felt like they were getting a sign that they shouldn't be doing this.
Okay. Like a tally?
Yeah.
Or
whatever.
Tally.
Yeah. Because I want to see where you would have said, okay, obviously this trip wasn't meant to be made. Because, spoiler alert, before they even get into the really bad stuff happens every so often with this group. I mean, it is a running bad luck train. So I want everybody to think of what you would do if you were in a situation where you were stuck somewhere. And this is like back in the day. So you don't have a cell phone. You don't have a car. Your means of travel are by animal or by foot. And keep in mind that there are young children too. So you're not just trying to survive for yourself.
Yeah.
You're trying to survive for them and keep them alive too. So think of what links in your head while we go through this episode. And I'm going to ask Echo to actually tell us what she would do right now. Think about worst case scenario. You are stuck and it is cold and you don't know when you're going to get out of here, because you can't simply call for help. You have to hope that a group of people that went out in snowshoes brings back help.
So I am thinking that if I were in this situation, trapped with a group of people, and obviously everybody's all stressed out, tempers are bound to run high. But in this situation for me, if I was there and I had my child with me, random child that's under my care, let's say you're there and cousin Jimmy dies and everybody is starving and there's not enough to eat, I would cook up cousin Jimmy in a heartbeat to keep my child alive.
I love how you gave the person a name. You didn't have to do that. We're not endorsing what they did, but I think we're both saying
Yeah.
we understand.
Situation with hardly any hope in being saved and with rations running out.
Well, they
or
were gone at this
completely run
point.
out.
Yeah, they were gone.
Yeah. Nothing to eat, with it being winter, with nothing else to harvest for food, even like trying to hunt in the area where you're at. Like there's not much that's going to be around. It's winter. It's the dead of winter. You're going to be hard pressed to find a rabbit out, hard pressed to find a deer, because deer like to move where there's food. And if you're in a place with no food for the deer, then you're not going to even be able to get a deer.
Well, you're in a mountain too. Let's take that
Yeah.
into consideration for one. And we're gonna go through some of the stuff they ate or tried to eat for subsistence before it got to this point.
Okay.
So we're gonna start at the very beginning of the trip. So you're gonna get a lot of dates, but I'm gonna give you stuff that was important that happened on this date so that you can mark their trail in your head or you can look it up. There's plenty of places online where you can find the exact route on a map of where they traveled. So we're starting in Illinois. So our next door state neighbor is where this group left off. And our whole adventure starts April 14th, 1846.
That's my birthday. Not the year, but the day.
In the town of Springfield. This party is getting ready to set off. Now, a couple things that are important to note. It was already late in the pioneer season because you were supposed to start way before April, especially if you were going all the way to California.
If you've ever played the game Oregon Trail on your computer, you should know that.
So we're joining George and Jacob Donner along with their families and also James Reed and his family. And they had decided to leave for California. It's also important to note this was about the time that the gold rush and all of that was a big ordeal, and that there was promise of land for all the people starting to immigrate to America at this point. There was promise of land and all this stuff out west. And actually, there are several reports that Abraham Lincoln and his family had signed up to leave with this group, but because his wife was pregnant again and he had just started his political career around this time, they didn't leave.
Okay.
So that's important to note as well.
Yeah, I would say so.
This journey was actually 2,500 miles. And they had to get there before the snow fell in the Sahara Nevada mountain. That was extremely important. But there's several events that we're going to talk about along the way of why they didn't make it there before.
Okay.
And it's actually going to be kind of a little bit upsetting when you find out if they would have been pretty much so a week earlier, they would have avoided the snowfall. So now I'm going to take you all the way to May 10th. The group actually arrives in Independence, Missouri.
Okay.
Then we get to the 19th, and they are 100 miles west in Indian Creek, and they actually join a larger wagon party at this point that is led by Colonel Williams Henry Russell.
That name is a mouthful.
It is. I thought about abbreviating it, and then I was like, no, better not. The group actually ends up spending May 27th to the 29th, what would be modern-day Kansas.
All right.
So they stopped due to high water in the river.
Okay.
And they actually had to build a raft to get their big old wagons across.
Okay.
So this is also where we have our first loss of the trip. Sarah Keyes,
Alrighty.
mother of Mrs. Reeds, passes away from tuberculosis. Imagine traveling in close quarters with somebody who had TB. That one just kind of sent a shiver up my spine because I was like, I know that this isn't the only group that of pioneers that had people die on the trail because it was long and hard, and people died from everything from dysentery to tuberculosis to smallpox to a whole bunch of stuff. while traveling from one side of the US to the other at this point. But I couldn't imagine being in close quarters with somebody. And I mean, she was older, but still. They also had a lot of new families join the wagon train once they had successfully made it across the river.
Okay.
In my head, I'm just picturing a little cartoon wagon on a raft. I don't know why. So we're going to press the fast forward button and get to June 27th, where the group arrives at Fort Laramie. There is where they ended up making a fatal decision. This is where they learned of Langsford Hastings, who was a mountaineer. He came up with a shorter route through the mountains. This ended up being a fatal decision because this shortcut was untested and actually went through a much rockier part of the mountain.
Yeah, that'll make it harder for the horses and the wagons, and not to mention all the people on foot.
Yeah. So this cutoff supposedly shaved 400 miles off of the trip. So you can see
I'm
why.
not sure that's worth it.
Yeah. Okay. First, you also have to take into consideration that they were walking on foot, by wagon, and had animals. So, but they were actually urged by James Clayman, a different mountaineer, to avoid this route altogether and to just take the normal route that everyone had taken to California.
Yeah, I mean, it seems safer.
So on July 19th, the group reaches Little Sandy Rock, Wyoming. This is where those taking Hastings Cutoff leave the rest of the group.
Okay.
So this is where the new group was formed that would become known as the Donner Party. And they actually elected George Donner to lead the group. So George and Jacob kind of take over leading the group and being in charge. And then on July 27th, they stopped at Fort Bridger, Wyoming, which was a resupply point. So this was important because it let them resupply their wagons. So Mr. Hastings had already left with another group. He was supposed to be joining up with this group, but for some reason, this group was running behind or whatever, so he had left with another group, but had left instructions for the Donner Party to follow.
Okay.
They rested here for 4 days and then began to follow his trail. So he was already ahead. Now he's even more ahead.
Yeah.
So if they were hoping to meet up with him, it just wasn't going to happen. And then on July 31st, when the party left Fort Bridger, there were now 74 people and 20 wagons in this party. Now, another thing that is worth noting is this group picked up immigrants and people all of the time.
Okay.
They constantly, throughout the trip, were picking people up and losing people. So then we're going to talk about the time period between September 3rd and the 26th in the Salt Desert. So they started to trek across, this is important, the 80-mile Great Salt Desert. But good old Hastings had told them in his note it was only 40 miles wide. I see that face.
Hastings.
I'm sure your tally marks are getting like longer than hell right now. So because they thought it was only 40 miles wide, but instead it was 80, they ran out of water on the third day of crossing this. So after the difficulty of crossing the Salt Desert, the group ended up resting for several days.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, a few individuals went ahead of the group to actually collect more supplies because they noticed that the food supplies were getting low. It's also important to note that at this point in time, it had already started to snow in the Sahara Mountain.
Oh, gosh.
Then, once they reached the Humboldt River in North Nevada, they actually learned that they had tracked an additional 125 miles with Hastings' so-called shortcut.
Hastings needs to get better at writing down directions.
Hastings needs to get lost.
That's true.
So then, in October, things started going more downhill even faster. And by that, I don't mean their wagons. So they were having shortages of food and supplies.
Yeah, I mean, they're always picking up extra people, right? So
exactly. As well,
their supplies aren't going to last.
Yeah. As well as angst from, the extra miles that they traveled. Obviously, that was causing a lot of tension to rise.
Mm-hmm.
And when a group is already on edge, there's already shortages and stuff, rising tensions equal bad outcome.
Oh, yeah.
So this is when people started to blame Hastings for the delay, which I be there with them,
Yeah, but they're also the ones that chose to rest for 4 days longer at the resupply spot.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into more of their resting here in a little bit,
Yeah.
which is going to kind of upset you. So they were blaming him for the delay, and I'm sure some of this resting was probably written in the plan. You know what I mean?
Maybe. But like 4 days, I know you get tired walking everywhere. I know you do, but 4 days whenever you're on a deadline.
I know. They also, though, started to blame Mr. Reed because it was his idea to take Hastings' shortcut. He's the one that pushed it the most. So
That's a fair blame, I guess.
So James Reed actually ended up in an altercation with two other party members, Snyder and Elliott. When Snyder ended up coming at Reed, Reed stabbed him, and it actually caused him to die. So Reed was actually banished from the group and ended up leaving his family behind. He does come back later in the story, though. He committed murder.
Yeah. And I mean, I would blame his family for not wanting to go with him either. But also, I don't blame him for leaving his family because safety in numbers, I guess.
Reed does end up still going to California, so he's going to meet back up with his family, essentially. He just was not allowed to travel with the group anymore. So I understand the idea of leaving the family with a group that is already heading in that direction. So tensions start really getting crazy in October. So around October 16th, the group reaches Truckee, California.
Okay.
At this point, for the good of the group, more food and supplies arrive. But the group also made the fatal decision to rest for 5 days, 50 miles from the mountain summit. And I see your face.
I would not have rested that long.
So, once they get started, moving back along, we come to fateful October 31st, when the Donner Party wagon gets a broken axle. See, that's what made this story so interesting. Not only did it have a very morbid outcome, and I'm not going to lie on that end, and, it shows the true lengths people are willing to go to survive. Thing seems cursed from the start because every so often, there was the river, there was the extra, miles that they had to travel. There was just a lot working against them from the very beginning. They started late in the season, and I'm sure there was a reason for that. I couldn't find anything that said the reason for that, but I don't get why you would start late in the season if you know there's a season for something.
Yeah.
So when this happened, the Donners actually stayed behind the rest of the group to try to fix their wagon, do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, while fixing the axle, George Donner cuts his hand pretty badly, which set the 22 people in their party even further behind the others. So then we get to November where things start to get, we're starting to finally see what is going to happen. They attempt to cross the Sahara Nevada mountain. They have multiple attempts, but all of them fell due to the snow. So at this point, they keep hoping for breaks in the weather because there's not much else you could do. Now, the thing that was making it bad was it had snowed a lot and then it rained, which compacted the snow.
Yeah.
But it wasn't enough rain to wash any snow away. It was just enough to compact the snow, and then it would snow again. That made it really hard because not only do you have snow at that rate, when it snows, then rains, then snows, then rains, you have ice in between layers of snow, and they're on a mountain, which makes things very dangerous and a lot harder for this group who already has a terrible time going on. So 2 men ended up going ahead of the Donner Party, but were actually unable to return. So I'm guessing that they made it out because it didn't say when they went ahead of the Donner Party.
Yeah.
But because there was a broken axle and then all this other stuff that happened, they could have technically made it if it was only 2 men.
Maybe.
And I am guessing they made it out because they were unable to return, and they also believed that the party had an adequate amount of livestock to feed themselves through the winter if they had gotten stuck.
Okay.
But however, the Donner Party had actually lost a lot of cattle during the journey. They had a run-in with some Native Americans that stole some of their cattle at one of the resting points. And then, if an animal gets injured on the trails, what they would do is they would immediately use that animal for food. So at this point, the group is pretty much stuck in it. They are stuck. There's no getting out. On December 16th, a group called the Forlorn Party, they're also referred to as the Snowshoe Party, set out. They were wearing snowshoes, and they hoped to bring back help for those that were stuck behind. However, the 15 that were in this group were already weak from hunger. So on the trail, even if you had supplies, you probably weren't the best fed because there was rationing and all kinds of other stuff. By the time they started to run out or severely ration, people were already pretty hungry.
Yeah.
Then we get up to Christmas. So we're going to talk about December 25th to the 29th with the group that set out in snowshoes. Between this, the Forlorn Hope group got caught out in the open in a blizzard. Several of the individuals unfortunately died at this point that are in this specific group. And the survivors ended up resorting to cannibalism at this rate with this one group. That's why it's important later that we're going to do the timeline first, and then I've got some more facts later, because there are some stuff in the timeline that I found in other articles, but it was hard to place a time on because a lot of this stuff, they just have people's accounts. So then we get to January. So we've made it to 1847. So on January 4th through the 8th, 4 more of the Donner Party attempted to cross the mountain passage, but were unsuccessful. Then on January 17th, survivors of the Forlorn Hope reached help. So what remained of this group reached the Johnson Ranch, and from this group, only 5 women and 2 men survived. That is 7 out of the 15 that left in the snowshoe party. They ended up cannibalizing 7 out of the 8 dead bodies.
Oof.
And 2 of the dead bodies were actually Native Americans that had joined the group, mostly to help lead them through the mountains. And they had actually been shot after they left the group and eaten. And we'll get into that a little more later. All of the others, however, died of a mix of starvation, the cold, and exhaustion. It's getting heavy, guys.
It is.
It's hard knowing it's real people. When you're telling folklore legends and other things, you have that, well, it could possibly not be real.
Yeah.
When you get into morbid history, it starts getting heavy. And it's heavy because I actually wrote the list of the names, which was hard. Like I said, we're going to honor all of them at the end. So on January 31st, the first relief left Sutter's Fort. And by February 5th, they reached Johnson's Ranch and continued on. On February 18th, the first relief group reached the lake where the Donner Party had camped. The remaining survivors were starving, and 11 of the immigrants had died. On the 21st, a second relief group set off from Johnson's Ranch. This group was actually led by none other than James Reed.
Mr. Stabby Pants.
Around this time is when the first relief group began to transport 23 of the immigrants that were strong enough to travel back. However, 2 of the survivors ended up returning back to the camp, and 2 of the other survivors had died through the journey. So, on March 1st, the second relief group, led none other by James Reed, reached the camps. And it's also important to note the 2 groups, the Donner Party, George and his brother and the Donner family were at the creek area camping because they got caught up because of the axle.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was another group, which was the Reeds and the other families that didn't stay behind, that were set up at the lake. There wasn't too far, I think, in between the two camps, but there was two camps going on. So when they arrived at the camps on March 1st, they found that the survivors, although weak, were still alive. They also, however, found significant evidence of cannibalism at this point. The second relief set off with 17 survivors on March 3rd.
Okay.
But things don't go according to plan like always. They were hit with a blizzard from March 5th to the 7th, and 2 of the survivors died. At this point, a lot of the survivors decided to actually return back to the camps
Mm-hmm.
as they were too weak to continue.
Yeah.
But 3 of the survivors and 2 children, so 5 of them altogether, continued forward with this relief group. Then a third relief group was actually sent and arrived to the camps on the 12th. At this point, more of the survivors had died, which was fairly obvious because we have starvation going on,
Mm-hmm. We've got blizzards.
and a lot has happened to these poor people. They actually departed 2 days later on the 14th, and again, several people stayed behind. Those left behind included George Donner, Thomas Donner, Samuel Donner, Lavina Murphy, and Louis Kingsburg. On April 17th, 1847, a 4th relief group arrived at the campsite, only to find that Louis Kingsburg was the only one still alive.
Did Lewis eat everybody?
Well, that's where things get a little bit shady in like a lot of the reports and things, because there are reports from some of the survivors and speculations that he actually liked the taste.
Mm.
And there's also reports that he was very aggressive with his wife, even though she was pregnant while on the trail.
Goodness.
So he's not like looking to be a very good person at this point,
Yeah.
but nobody was there. So we can't speculate what happened, or at
Yeah.
least I try not to, because I want to believe that everything they did, minus the Native American thing,
Yeah.
they did because people were already dead.
Yes.
And he actually reached Sutter's Fort April 29th of 1847.
So a year and a few days after they first set out.
Yes. Then, before we end off this story, it's important to note that General Stephen W. Henry arrived at the campsite on June 22nd. He and his troops were horrified at the sight that they saw. They actually gathered up the cannibalized remains and basically anything that was left. They put it into the one remaining cabin that was still standing and burnt the cabin and everything in it until there was nothing left.
I honestly can't blame them because, I mean, back then, what else would they have done?
So there is a statue there at the area that the main camp was at. There also is a town at that lake now.
I don't think I'd want to live there, vacation there.
It's more of a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
There is a lady I watched on YouTube, and I wish I could remember her name. And if I had time and my keyboard weren't so clicky, I would look it up for you guys. But if you type it in on YouTube, it's one of the first few that pop up. She actually goes and visits the town and then kind of walks you through the areas in which stuff we're at. And she actually goes to the museum that's about this party.
Okay.
I will give you a spoiler alert. The museum does not focus on the cannibalism. So,
Yeah.
spoiler
So-
alert there. They just focus on
Don't
the
go
things.
for the cannibalism.
Yeah. They just focus on the things that's true fact,
Mhm.
because there has actually been an argument lately that they did and didn't resort to cannibalism.
Yeah.
There's an alarming amount of lack of human bones in that area from
Yeah.
what would have been this time period that heavily suggests that's what happened.
Yeah.
Just because in doing so, this is kind of disgusting. Bones would have been chopped and everything else.
Mhm.
So if there were any left, they'd be so small it would be hard to tell if there actually was any evidence.
Yeah, and once bone gets cooked, I think it loses its integrity as well.
I did read in one article where they were saying that there wasn't any evidence, that the truth was, of all the bones they've collected, most of the bones were the size of a fingernail, and at that point, archaeologists were saying that it would be hard to tell if there were any significant evidence of actual cannibalism, and hard enough still to tell what was animal and what was human.
Yeah.
Especially from the fact of how far back it dated. So now we'll get into kind of some of the more facts that kind of feed into the story that I didn't really know where to put in the timeline. And I wanted to keep the timeline the way it was because I think it was important to tell you guys beginning to end what exactly happened. So until now, much of what they knew about the weather actually came from the survivors and the rescuers and what they said after the event actually happened.
Okay.
But of course, now they've got more technology. And actually, it was the most terrific weather event recorded in the Sahara Nevada that occurred during the winter.
So, like, the worst winter they've had.
Yeah. As far as when that article was written, which was in the last couple of years, because I try to stay with stuff that's relatively recent. So
Yeah.
if there was new information, it was added in. So according to the stormking.com, that was the worst storm in the winter that they had had while these poor people were trying to cross it.
Bad luck from beginning to end.
And this storm actually hit when they reached the base of the mountain. So if they wouldn't have rested 5 days, they would have possibly either been in the storm or past the point when the storm occurred.
Yeah.
So that storm actually laid more than 6 feet of snow on that pass.
That is rough.
That is terrible. Okay, like we had one snowfall in Indiana since I was a kid, where the snow was 3 foot deep.
Yeah,
and
it
let
was
me
up
tell
to my
you,
hips. That
Yeah.
was hard to move in.
Okay, and I was a kid.
Yeah.
So imagine, like, that would be taller than me now. And I'm
Yeah.
short. I'm
Yeah.
short, but that's besides the point.
Yeah, I'm
That
like
would be
5'3".
Yeah. You can imagine 6 feet of snow. But I knew how hard it was to move in 3 feet of snow. And then you've got covered wagons, cattle, children.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. This is also important to note. The most substantial proof that they have actually came from the survivors themselves and those who went through the event. Because after so many years, evidence of stuff gets harder and harder to find.
Yeah.
Especially in a place where it is snowing and raining and on a mountain. And they actually have skimmed that lake. And that's where they found a bunch of those bones that were the size of a fingernail. So they have looked for evidence. I'm sure they found some, but you have to take into account the time period, the fact that they gathered up everything that they had seen and put it in one cabin and burnt it down, and everything else that could have happened between now and then.
Yeah.
In correspondence, journals, and later interviews, a lot of the survivors freely admitted that when everything else possible, and I want to reiterate that, everything possible, and I'm going to tell you some of the stuff they tried to eat, when all of that was gone, they turned to cannibalism. And before this point, they even boiled and ate the animal hides that they had, that they were using for the covered wagons, for roofing, for clothing. They boiled that in water, and it became a gelatinous paste, and they ate that.
Oh.
They also had ate charred animal bones, twigs, leaves, and tree bark, along with all of the animals. That includes possible family pets. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking horses, cattle, any type of livestock.
Yeah, I bet they wouldn't have brought cats with them, but probably a dog.
Because back then, dogs were used for hunting. They were, now, some people still now use them for hunting. But back then, people still had dogs. So that's important to note. Okay, they tried to eat animal hide.
Yeah.
Okay, I know what leather smells like when it's hot. Now imagine that in water and then
Bleh.
grinding it and then
No,
trying to
thank
eat that.
you.
Okay. And at this point, a lot of them are suffering from hypothermia and starvation. When you start starving, a lot of things start happening mentally. So a lot of people are starting to get delirious too. And actually, there's not an amount of time that you can calculate that it will take you to starve to death because it is different for every person. It's a variation. So at this point, that's when they turned to the only protein that was available at this point in time because it's winter, there's tons of snow, and it is important to note, other than this one instance we're going to talk about here in a little bit, that everyone they did cannibalize was already dead from either starvation or hypothermia or something else. They tried to make sure that, one, it didn't look like human meat. They tried to make sure that it looked as unrecognizable as possible. They also tried to make sure that people weren't eating relatives or friends. You know, they were out of options.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing to note. If you're to the point of being delirious, of if I don't eat this, I'm going to die, I'm willing to bet you're going to eat whatever you have to. And they've already ate some pretty disgusting things at this point.
Yeah. I mean, they ate leather mush.
So there were nearly 90 members in the Donner Company, and 81 of them became trapped at what is now Donner Lake and Alder Creek during this winter. So that's why I was talking about there was a group at a lake and a group at a creek.
Yeah.
Now, there were 2 Native Americans in this group, Louis and Salvador. They went out with the Forlorn Hope / the Snowshoe Party, and they actually refused to engage in cannibalism. Now, it's also important, I think, to note here at this part, and I don't necessarily know if it was in their tribe, but there is some Native American folklore where you turn into a creature if you actually eat human flesh. Native Americans had an actual story about this where you become a Wendigo if you engage in eating human flesh. But they refused to engage in this. And actually later, they ran off out of fear from this party that they might be murdered if the others ran out of meat. This is heart-wrenching, sorry. But if you think about it, and if you're forced to choose, you're going to choose somebody that you don't know.
Yeah.
That's essentially how it's going to go. And morals are going to start going out the window when it comes to survival because you're trying to live because you have no other choice. They were found days later, exhausted and lying in the snow. And a member of the party named William Foster shot them both. And then, of course, they used them for the purpose of survival. That's how I'm going to put it because it's very sad. These are the only 2 for fact that they knew were murdered for this purpose. All the others were said to have died of natural causes. Also, there was somebody who tried to stop them from taking this whole route, and we're going to talk about him now.
Okay.
There was a man by the name of Edward Bryant who was a journalist, and he had experience with this part of the trail the Donner Party was planning to take, and knew it would be impossible, let alone with wagons, but also with small children and women. He left letters for the Donner Party, suggesting that they take the traditional trail. Unfortunately, for some reason or another, these letters didn't reach the party. And later, both Bryant and James Reed accused Bridger of intentionally intercepting the letters so that they never made it to the Donner Party.
Postman just forgot to get them the letter before they set out again?
No.
I don't know.
So the story is that apparently he's actually some sort of investor or businessman, and he was greedy, and he was just trying to get them there as fast as possible because certain people did get paid for getting settlers to come to California. So obviously you wanted people to get there as fast as possible because you wanted your name on those people so that you would get paid for it. And sadly, that's what happened here. There were a ton of things. How many tally marks did you end up with?
I got 10.
Yeah.
10 tally marks of places where I would have stopped and turned around.
Shit that just went wrong, and of people who were greedy, and it's sad and it's terrible. This story was actually, I think, one of the first things we talked about when we had started setting up the podcast. We knew we wanted to do things other people, or try to aim for things other people hadn't covered, and really interesting topics and things that didn't fall under certain categories. And we knew we wanted to do some bit of morbid history, because we have researched a lot on plagues and things like this. And we wanted to share these stories in a way that, one, told the facts, but also honored the people that didn't make it out of these situations. Obviously, eventually, when we talk about some of the past plagues and things like that, we can't name every.
And oftentimes, back during the time of the bubonic plague, there were just too many deaths for them to even keep track of the names.
So this was actually the first topic we had talked about doing. I'm going to go ahead and note the websites first. Then we'll do our little homage thing. So first off, I used softschools.com. A lot of the sites I went for were things that would be used in a school setting, because this is a historical event. The stormking.com, which had a lot of information about the weather in that time period. The donnerpartydiary.com. Of course, history.com, which is the History Channel. So I'm going to turn it over to Echo and let her do her little part of this.
All right. These are the names of the 38 people who died along the way or at the camps. George Donner, age 60. Tamison Donner, age 45. Jacob Donner, age 56. Elizabeth Donner, age 45. Isaac Donner, age 5. Samuel Donner, age 4. Louis Donner, age 3. William Hook, age 12. Samuel Shoemaker, 25. John Denson, his age was not given. Sarah Keyes, age 75. Bayless Williams, age 24. Milford Elliott, age 28. James Smith, age 25. Patrick Dolan, age 35. Eleanor Eddy, age 25. Margaret Eddy, age 5. James Eddy, age 3. Lavina Jackson Murphy, age 50. Landrum Murphy, age 15. Glimwell Murphy, age 12. George Foster, age 4. William Pike, age 25. Catherine Pike, age 1. Ada Casberg, age 3. Louis Jr. Casberg, born on the trail and died at the cabins. Charles Berger, age 30. Augustus Splinter, no age given. Joseph Reinhardt, age 30. Harriet McCuthan, age 1. Franklin Graves, age 57. Elizabeth Graves, age 47. John Snyder, 25. Charles Stanton, age 35. Lewis, one of the natives that helped them on the trail. Salvador, the other native that helped them on the trail. Louis Halloran, age 25. Antonio, last name unknown, age 23. And now we will do our moment of silence. And as you can see, there was literally somebody from every walk of life on this trail together. Newborns to, I believe, the oldest was 75. That's impressive for somebody to be 75 years old back in that time.
Well, that was the Donner Party. I know it was heavy, guys.
Yeah.
But we did have a really fun episode last week. So if you haven't listened to that and you kind of want something a little more fun, you can go back and listen to that. So just to let you guys know, we are starting to get a bit of a schedule going. Depending on where you listen to the podcast, usually it will either be available on a Saturday or a Sunday, as long as I'm not running behind, because I do the editing.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough for editing.
You're plenty smart. It's just software be difficult sometimes.
Yes, it do.
And we almost had an issue last week because I was 2 minutes. This is a little palate cleanser / we're going to bring up the mood for a minute here. after such a heavy topic. I was literally 5 minutes away from being done editing and my computer crashed and I couldn't get the software to reopen. And I was like, if I have to start all over again, so help me, it's not going to be done on Saturday.
Oh.
So luckily enough, I got it to open. Thank goodness, or who knows what would have happened.
Yeah.
Well, we know what would have happened. You would have still got your episode because I'm a work.
It would have just been late.
This would have been
but
late. Yeah. I keep getting told you work too much. You work too much because, guys, you have to understand. I have a job, and then I come home and literally pretty much show from the time I get done at my job to the time I go to bed. In between, I do some other stuff, so it's not all centered on this. But
yeah,
I check the podcast email. I check other sites. I check sure everything is working okay. There's no issues. I just never stop.
Yes, so you can absolutely thank Scarlett for everything about this podcast.
So, guys, this is a call to action for all of you out there because we know, because we can see how many people are clicking on this.
Yeah.
And we know not all of you are following. But if you keep coming back, you should really hit the follow button or the subscribe button or whatever it is on the site that you listen to the podcast on. Just so we know that you're there and that you're coming back, because that's important.
Yeah.
If you want to leave a review or a comment or whatever, we're going to read it. We promise. We check that stuff.
Yeah. We need to know how we're doing. If we're doing bad, we need to know. If we're doing good, we still need to know.
If for some reason you want to email us, give us a story to read on the podcast, tell us something you want to hear us talk about, whatever, you can do that. We have an email. swustories@hotmail.com. We check it all the time, I promise. We also have several social media, places you can follow us. We are on Instagram at Strange, Weird, and Unusual. We are on Twitter at Strange, Weird, UN1. We have a Facebook page now.
Yay, Facebook page.
So if you guys want to know what we're doing on days that we're not doing this, or see silly stuff that we post sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. I've started doing that a little more. I need to get Echo posting on social media.
I need to do a lot better on that.
You can probably find it on there. If you want to suggest something, if you want to see us do like polls asking you guys what you want the next episode to do, follow us on there because we'll probably start doing that pretty soon.
Yeah.
We are hoping to start some winter/Christmas/holiday, whatever you celebrate, themed episodes in the next couple weeks. I think we're planning 3, but who knows if that's actually going to happen. It might be more than that. It's at least going to be 3.
Yeah.
At least 3. Because we got 3 weeks that we will have stuff come out before actual Christmas. We're planning on 3. Bonus material might happen. Who knows? We're crazy over here.
We are pretty crazy over here.
Is there anything else I'm forgetting? We talked about social media. We talked about the email. We talked about following.
Probably not. If not, we'll double down on it next time, I guess.
I guess so. If you guys have suggestion for winter themed stuff, definitely send it our way because I think we've got at least 2 ideas for episodes so far. We can kind of count this one as a winter themed episode because most of the stuff did take place towards the end of the year. We're not counting it in our 3 necessarily.
No.
we've got 3 pretty good ones, I think.
Yeah.
I've already started the research for one of them. I do know that probably not January, but in one of the following months at the beginning of the year, we're going to start, not all the time, but we're going to dedicate some months to doing 3 to 4 episodes on a specific topic.
Yeah.
So I know we talked about creepy/haunted dolls/weird doll stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll probably be a 4 episodes on that. We've talked about maybe some haunted hospitals, maybe 4 episodes on that.
That should be pretty interesting.
We're trying to work on some more like big stuff. We're going to keep the small stuff too, the itty stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're going to try maybe before the end of December to get another cryptid work in. Maybe. Because
that should be fun.
We enjoyed the Mothman way too much.
I feel like we did have way too much fun with that.
It was something. I mean, it was all good evidence. So, but join us next week. Hopefully pretty soon. Not going to give a date yet because nothing's worked out 100%. We are looking at getting at least one guest/guest group maybe on the podcast pretty darn soon. Fingers crossed. We hope we kept you entertained, even though this week was more so on the morbid side. We hope you kind of enjoyed and liked our little morbid history. It's probably going to be a thing that sticks around because even if we do haunted places or paranormal events, there's going to be history behind it. So it's probably going to be a running theme, even if it's not one historical event. If you guys want to learn more about it, definitely go online, visit some of the places I told you about. There's some books, there's movies. Make sure if you're going to watch a movie, though, you know whether it is an actual, like, fact-based movie or documentary versus some of the other ones I saw that were clearly entertainment purpose, loosely based on real events things. Just because if you want facts, you need to make sure you're checking that. And we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.